Good evening and welcome to the EDA meeting. It is Monday, December 11th at 7 p.m. and I call the meeting to order. Looking for a motion to adopt this evening's agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Warden,
I'll second that.
second by Fay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Pose same sign. All right, the motion carries. This evening we are missing Commissioner DeLuca and Commissioner Jack Henrik, so with their regrets, they are not here. All right, we will move on to the minutes. Looking for a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting on October 9th.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Commissioner Burak,
Second.
second by Commissioner Warden to approve the minutes as submitted. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. Our new business this evening is our downtown redevelopment, and I will turn that over to our city planner, Mr. Coltis.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I'm happy to be in front of you tonight with a proposal for consideration for a downtown redevelopment project that has been something we've been working on since last summer when we decided not to move forward with the previous project. We had a group of developers who had a purchase agreement on the 5210 Main Street property, and they were interested in trying to put together a proposal for the city to consider. And so what we have before you tonight, and I'll walk through kind of all aspects of it, is essentially a purchase agreement for the city's property to be combined with the 5210 property for the purpose of constructing a 100-unit mixed-use, multi-story, multifamily development. So, as we've talked quite a bit on this particular site, we've had a handful of developers come through the process, propose somewhat similar developments to the one that's being proposed tonight. And the last one that we considered was a multifamily, about 58-unit project that relied on 40 tax classification, which was a reduced tax class, and it would have been 100% affordable from that standpoint. When we looked at that, we looked at the economics of that, and we looked at what the city was really wanted to see developed on that property. That didn't align with the goals that we had set out. And so we had, as a staff, and then kind of confirmed with EDA and council, that we wanted to see a mixed-use development, ideally, which would include retail on the first floor on Main Street, as well as a market rate apartment product or multifamily product. We had talked about leaving some spaces on the site potentially for commercial development, maybe outside of the singular building, or combining those. And so there's a couple of developers that are interested in developing this site into what's being proposed tonight. And so the entity that we're talking about, Maple Development LLC, is not a created official entity. That's what they are targeting their creation of. It's a group of individual developers that would come together, create the LLC. It's not dissimilar to what we saw with the last development, which was Maine and Maple LLC, which was really just a conglomeration of a couple of development groups. But in this case, Maple Development LLC would be the group that we'd be working with if this were to move forward. So the proposal that is in front of you tonight is a 100-unit mixed-use development. They provided a site plan that is what I would call a concept level site plan to show how the site could be developed with the building that they are looking at, with the number of units that they are looking at. Something that we haven't, that we've asked for consistently in all of the projects we've looked at, is first floor retail. And this particular proposal does show 8,700 square feet of retail floor space on the first floor, along with the 100 units. And I'll just walk through on that. I don't know if you want to look at the screen. It might be easiest,
It's
but
easier.
So the first floor retail, that we're talking about is really located in this box. Can you guys see that? This box here, this would be the first floor retail. So the idea or the thought behind this concept is by locating the entrance to the site in this location, coming in here and creating parking kind of on the end cap of that building, you create the potential where you could have multi-sided retail that has exposure to Highway 12 as well as could front on Main Street, which is a little bit different than some of the other proposals we looked at where the building would extend all the way through. This proposal also allows still for the closing of Bud Avenue on the east side of the site, as the parking could come in kind of standalone without Bud Avenue being located in that location. Now, one of the challenges that we talked through with the developer and then came back with a couple of iterations to get to where we are with this concept was, in order to park 100 units, the space that is underneath just the floor plan is not enough space. So if you take the L shape of this building and you go and you create a ramp down, and then underneath it doesn't create enough parking. And so when we were talking to the developer about trying to create additional parking that is enclosed parking to provide that kind of one parking space enclosed per unit, the concept that they came up with was to take this part of the box here and actually create underground parking underneath that box, as well as first floor parking on the first level of that box. And so in looking at the concept on Maple, you would have first floor parking as well as underground parking, and then you would have underground parking underneath the remainder of the block on Main Street. So there's a ramp that comes down over here that would go down below to get to the underground parking, and then there's just an at-grade access here that would allow you access into that first floor parking. The parking totals we've looked at in concept, that would be something we'd have to go through in more detail if we were to go through a full planning and zoning process, the entitlement process, I call that. So with this though, with this first floor parking, they did provide some example imagery of what that could look like. We talked about we still wanted to maintain a Main Street feel when we're looking at how that goes together. And so with that, they provided just some imagery that does start to highlight some examples of how they've utilized or how we could utilize first floor parking, noting that these lower levels on these images are actual first floor parking. And it's something that we're seeing in the industry a little more and more now because of the challenges with parking. Because of the climate we're in Minnesota, outdoor parking isn't exactly as desirable. And so trying to get first level or underground parking or indoor parking is something that a lot of people are trying to achieve or accomplish through this type of architecture. So trying to create a building that has architecture that essentially hides or maintains a certain aesthetic on that first floor parking. Now going back to the site plan, a couple other pieces on this in order to get the 100 unit count. I will note that we've talked to them a lot about this idea of height, and we've had discussions relating to height, whether we would cap at a maximum a certain number of levels. We've talked about 3, we've talked about 4. I think the initial proposal we had from Gordon James was 5, but in this case, one of the things I talked about with the developer and we've talked about is the idea that if it's just a consistent level of height, regardless of how high or how short, that has one feel or perceived feeling. If you can stagger or break up that height, it starts to help alleviate some of that bulk or mass. So in this particular proposal, because of the first floor parking, the blue box here, this is 5 stories. So if you look at what we're talking about here with the blue box, 5 stories, that's right here, this 5 stories. if you go then and we drop down, we're gonna get to, see if I can get this, in the purple, we get to 4 stories, so it's a stagger here, and then as you drop down to the red, this is 3 stories here. So you can see that it's steps by stories. And we talked about what does that actually look like in practice, and they cited an example of a building that's going in right now in the Twin Cities that has kind of that same staggering effect, where you can see there's variation or undulation in the ultimate height of that building, going from 5 to a kind of 4-story on the one side with a dropped entryway.
May I ask a clarifying question? Is that being built or is built in the Twin Cities?
Is it 100% built now?
I think it's built.
It was in the process when we've been talking about it. It might be.
I would love to drive by. I mean, because
What's
that's
the,
where I was.
There's one's in Monticello.
the
Monticello?
Monticello building is that.
Okay.
That particular
There's
example.
retail on the first floor, and then it's staggered. And I don't know if they got occupancy or not, but they should be pretty close.
I'm a visual learner, so I'd love to drive by.
I
So
can send out
I
the.
appreciate
I could
this
send
picture
out
a
the
lot.
address of this particular
Do
building.
you know approximately where in Monticello
It's
it
right
is?
on the main drag, on 25.
Oh.
So if you take the hospital, before you go past, I think
Yeah.
it's the hospital on the right-hand side, you get to the T, it'd be directly across, you could take it right over
Right
the
up.
river.
Yeah, right on the right off the river on the
Right
main.
off the river.
I can find that. Thank you.
So, so that this a couple. I mean, there's a couple of things here that again, conceptually, what we're looking for is does this align with what the city's looking at? Number of stories, architecture, ultimate parking layout, access layout are all things that would be further developed as we would get into the actual plans. But from a high-level conceptual standpoint, this is the concept plan that we would at least start with if this project were to move forward.
Mark,
Yeah, go
Can I
ahead.
interrupt you? Well, so that we don't, can I go back to parking?
Yep.
There's a significant amount, 60-some, surface parking. Is there a reason why the underground component of the parking is just contained to your blue rectangle? Is there a reason why they didn't increase the subsurface parking by carrying it into the 4-story?
So, yeah, and that's my mistake for how I explained it. So the underground parking is the entirety of the L shape of that building.
Oh, it is?
It
That's
is.
what- okay.
So if we were to look at,
Look
if
on
we were to look
page-
at the underground parking, everything underground, everything inside of this is underground parking.
Okay.
On the lower level. Then the blue is just first floor parking. That's the only other spot that would have first floor parking.
How many levels do we know?
Just one underground, and then the first floor would be a second. And what they're proposing in this is 96 enclosed spaces and then 60 surface spaces. Then there's also the on-street spaces, which would be retail potential and then downtown potential spaces. So when you're looking at that, right now what we're talking about parking is somewhere in that neighborhood of 1 per bedroom. It's a little bit over 1 per bedroom. That's kind of the matrix that a lot of people are gravitating to versus what's the traditional model, which was a 2 per bedroom. I mean, a 2 per unit. We've started to see a 1 per bedroom ratio starting to work. But again, this is not something you're considering on the parking exactly.
Yeah.
That's something we would consider through the planning and zoning process.
I do have one quick question, and this is something I've learned from salt use. Is there any way that the idea of making it use the sun to help you with your winter control, is that an option that could be explored in the future?
Could you expand?
Okay, so like now, currently the parking lot is to the north, and that's your parking lot is gonna be completely in shade. where if the parking lot was on the other side, the sun would be able to work less salt, less deterioration, and less maintenance cost. It's an option, I'm just throwing it out.
Well, I guess from my viewpoint, my understanding was that you wanted a Main Street presence. And so
Flip the
the
whole-
choice is to push everything to the Highway 12 side, and then you don't have that Main Street.
Okay, all right, that's clarification then, thank you.
The other consideration, Commissioner, that I would note is because we're surrounded by asphalt in this case, it might be more advantageous that the road's actually the part that gets the solar versus the,
Right, okay.
so, but we were trying to do Main Street focus, so that was the reason that.
It was just something
Yeah,
I was
it's
throwing
good,
out.
good point. So that's, I can talk as much or as little detail. Obviously, this is a concept plan. I want to talk through some of the deal points then, because you guys are familiar with what we've tried or attempted to do in terms of the deal point as it relates to kind of how the financing of this building would be structured, and the financial commitment that the city would be potentially making for something like this, and then what is that? What are the other kind of key aspect points? So with this, what we've talked about is the city would, in this particular deal, sell the land for $100,000. Now, I do note in this particular example, because we haven't had this, we haven't owned the piece of land previously, but we did obtain the MnDOT land. I am using that as a part of this. You can see it up in the corner there, where those two, the trapezoid in the right corner and then the little triangle, those are the MnDOT pieces. Whether we need all of those pieces included or part of those pieces, that's something that we could work through, but it is a point of clarification that it's 100,000 is what this particular deal, and there's not necessarily magic to this. This is just the terms we've talked about between the city and the developer. The TIF on this, the developer is asking for tax increment financing. That's been consistent with all of the proposals we've seen on this site. In this particular case, we looked at a couple of different models, but what we had gone back to the developer with in offering was 70% of the TIF generated from this project for 26 years. That's estimated to have a present value of, or net present value of $3,274,000. The reason we went back and structured this, we've looked at different ways to structure. We've looked at 90% for 15, 16, 17 years. We've looked at splits, 50-50. We've looked at a couple other ways over the past on how to structure this. What we looked at, and the city's financial advisor and TIF consultant looked at, is what would it take for the city to be made whole without having to ask the taxpayers to come up with a front load in this particular case, noting the amounts of debt obviously the city council is considering for road projects. The 70-30 with this particular deal allows the city to pay its debt on the city's portion of public improvements that would need to be made to consider this. And I'm not gonna do Tammy's job and try to go through the detail. Tammy did this. This is planner math here, right? She'll do the real math with the council, but that's essentially the basis for that deal, is that 70-30 works to be able to keep the city's tax debt levy out of this particular equation.
I think the last proposal, it was a 14-year redevelopment, but that was 90-10, wasn't it?
It ended up being 17 years of
17 years,
redevelopment.
right.
It was a 90-10, and it was asking the average homeowner to pay about,
$300.
well, it was closer to 100, but it was in the ballpark of about $100 per year.
Okay.
In debt levy on that particular debt issuance that you would look at. I will note, and I noted in the report, the estimated taxable market value, not the actual construction cost or anything, but the county's taxable market value is around $22 million on this. It's about $195,000 per unit. I think that's low, but that's where we're seeing pricing in Hennepin County start to shift to, and the assessors are being really conservative. With that $22 million, then the other piece of this in thinking about TIF is that the city had estimated initially about 1.5 million in public improvement costs. We're now up to 2 million in public improvement costs, noting that the last time we did that analysis was about 2.5 years ago. And so when we asked the engineer to kind of brush that off again when we were running this TIF analysis, they came back and said it's closer to $2 million. There's some variables in there that could go, I think, down, not necessarily up. We're trying to be conservative with that estimate. So then one of the things that was that the council and the EDA talked about at length with a lot of our the few last deals that we've looked at is the city fee piece. In this particular case, we've talked to the developer, we've estimated the fees, and the developer would be paying these fees, which amount to approximately $955,000 in city fees. I'll note one of those fees in the next paragraph, which talks about stormwater. So with this development, we've talked that putting stormwater on site is going to be difficult, but it also is probably not what we want in our downtown, right? Right at the heart of the downtown, to have a stormwater pond, to have a dry basin, to have other kinds of stormwater management systems just doesn't fit with what we're trying to do with the downtown aesthetic, plus just functionality. And so with that, we've talked about creating a regional stormwater piece with the redevelopment of Main and Maple Streets. So that would be the city's redevelopment of Main and Maple. The city engineer has looked at and believes that they can accommodate stormwater from this property as well as what's required for the street project. I don't know how much more beyond that capacity-wise is available, but that's something that would be looked at when you're doing the feasibility for the street project. And so with that, what we'd be talking about is the developer would have a regional stormwater connection. I have a fee that's included in that fee estimate of $200,000, which is a connection fee. We don't know the true math yet, but we estimated that to be the right amount, or at least a kind of high level amount for that stormwater. But that means that this development would essentially have what I call a plug-in, plug and play, if you will. They would capture all their stormwater on their site, and then they would have a pipe that would connect into a city-owned pipe that would then take the water, convey the water to a city-owned stormwater pond. We would manage that pond and be responsible for that, and so we would just really provide them with that plug-and-play connection in exchange for the fee that I'm talking about.
Mark, can I interrupt you again?
Mm-hmm.
You talked to the city engineer who thought it would be feasible to make this regional storm system. Did our city engineer give you an idea of what this regional system is going to increase our reconstruction fees by?
They did. There's an estimate, but it's a couple $100,000, and I can give you the number, Commissioner. I have it. My email is reloading right now, or I'd search and find it for you like right away, but it's going to tell me that they can't find it.
Not less than $200,000.
Correct.
Okay.
Public improvements, one of the things we've talked about consistently is that on top of the stormwater, which is just a separate kind of fee, the developer would agree to pay $300,000 for the public infrastructure. That would be in lieu of an assessment on the project. That represents essentially a 20% obligation on the assessment, although we've noted for this case, and I've talked to Tammy, and I know you all have talked about a little bit, that there would be additional assessments on the Main and Maple project, and so there would be some additional assessments that would likely be levied against benefiting properties for that portion of the project that benefits the other property. But with that, the city would look at the construction of the streets. That would include concrete curb gutter, base, everything related to the streets, the street lighting, the landscaping. And so when I talk landscaping, I talk about, picture the McGarry's post office kind of frontage. That's our streetscape package, if you will. It's got in-grate street trees, lighting, some decorative pavement. The sidewalks then associated with that public utilities, including water, sanitary, sewer, and storm, and then the stormwater ponds, which would be the regional stormwater pond. In this case, the site improvements for the developer, they would construct sanitary sewers on site, water mains and stubs on site, stormwater and storm sewer conveyance to the city connection, their own internal landscaping, pedestrian improvements, grading, those types of things. So what we've come up with is the city attorney drafted a draft, I call it a draft, purchase agreement, which would essentially allow the developer to control the site for the purpose of going through due diligence. Due diligence for the developer would include doing some updated market studies, looking at and doing more with the securing of financing for the project. And then following that due diligence, essentially letting the city know that their intent to proceed would be kind of next steps, submitting an application to the city for entitlement. That would be site plan, plating, and all of the various reviews associated with getting a new development through the city's planning, zoning, and then ultimately city council approval process. The period of time in the agreement that is in the draft would take the developer out essentially 6 months with with a possibility to extend another 90 days to be able to go through that process and get through the entitlement to the point where they could close on the project. The city, in the meantime, during that time period, would go through and formalize a tax increment financing district on this project, and then put in place the necessary process and then approvals to approve the tax increment financing, essentially the subsidy to the developer for the purpose of doing this project. There's the other piece of this, and that would need to be coordinated, and you council know, and EDA would be, the city would have to do feasibility studies on the Main and Maple public improvements, and then ultimately, if this project were to move forward with that public improvement project as well. And so with that, there's kind of 2 or 3 moving pieces that would all have to be aligned if we were to move forward with granting this preliminary purchase agreement or this purchase agreement, allowing the developer their time to do the due diligence and then to go through the entitlement process.
Can you, are you able to elaborate on that a little more, in particular, the timing with the road project, since we're kind of already moving forward with that, and what that would be doing?
Sure. The road project piece and this piece. So if we were to go through entitlement in a perfect world and they get done kind of Q2, if you will, maybe, of this year, I don't know, that's best case, with the entitlement, then they're talking about construction potentially starting at the end or summer to fall of this year. It's an 12 to 18 month, but an 18-month build, I think, start to finish, somewhere in that neighborhood. That gives the city the option of probably doing the public improvements in 25 and aligning that. But I think that's something we'd have to come back to on the timing. If we were to say yes, then we would ask the developer for a schedule on their end, and then we would try to see what that looks like and talk to the engineer about how do we align that. The one thing that I would tell you that I've thought of, and I mean, the engineers probably think of it a little different, but I mean, we have 4-sided access to this site, which does help with coordination, if you will, of construction occurring simultaneously, right? So I think there is an opportunity that some of the construction could happen together, but that's something that we'd have to work out as we get, if we were to get to the next step in this.
Okay.
So there would be more to come. I would
Yeah.
work through that with the engineer and with the developer. I mean, that would be a kind of next step piece. The other aspect that I put in the report, and I think we've talked about quite a few times, is we did the phase 1. We haven't done the phase 2. We've purposely not done the phase 2 because the phase 2 has a timer on it once we start it. Really, the phase 2 is best done with a real project rather than being done in a vacuum, because we have to at the end of the phase two, identify where the project's going to go on that property that does have impacts with what is required to be done. And then we have to do what's called a response action plan for the PCA, and that is project specific. It's not totally generic. So if we try to guess, if we try to use a concept or something like that, and then the actual project came in and changed that, we'd have to do it all over again. So we've held off on doing that phase two and response action plan. That's about a $15,000 to $20,000 ad. Wank's been teed up on it. I even talked to him last fall about where they were on. Last fall. Like towards the end of summer, I asked them if they were still kind of in the same ballpark. They were, and I think the timing is still in that 6 to 8 week time period. But that is another piece that we would have to time accordingly with the kind of developers process to be able to put that into place and understand what the phase two gives us, go through that with the PCA. So tonight we've got a concept plan, we've got some building imagery, not a specific elevation, although we thought this was a pretty good package to try to move forward with. We've got deal points at a high level. The EDA, of course, you're asked to make a recommendation to council, and then we would finalize some of the deal points a little bit further between now and the council's consideration of this. We could probably put together a draft or a concept of the schedule or kind of some of the pieces that have to go together with that also. Or if there's questions, if there's more information or anything else council can think about or want, or EDA could think about or want, we can keep working on obtaining or putting together that information as well. The tip run that I have isn't the full financial analysis in the back. It does give you a good indication. I think it's in the packet. You're not going to be able to read it because that screen's so small. But the kind of key piece of this, if you look at this just going down, is the taxable market value. That's what the county gave us as taxable market value, and then you look at the taxes payable versus the original valuation, and you come up with available TIF from the district. And then TIF to city for debt service, and then TIF available to the developer. And then the last column is the net present value of that. And so if you look at that, it gives you a pretty good indication that when you're looking at a $22 million building with the valuations that exist, you take that out. Obviously, we're just capturing the new increment, or the increment created the new taxes, and that gives us somewhere in that neighborhood of about $325,000 to $350,000 a year generated off the potential redevelopment of that site. Be happy to answer any questions on the property. Obviously, this is what we've talked about. It's a concept. It's preliminary. It's a new group. It's a new concept. I do think we've been going after the retail space on the first floor. I will note that we have talked to the developer about that, a portion of that being taken over or used for City Hall. They are open to that, and so that's something we could continue to talk to them about, or it could be maintained as retail. I think with the configuration of this site, one of the things that I like is that there's this kind of dual-sided space that has really good visibility from the highway, but also could have a really strong Main Street presence. And that's something that I don't know that we've seen on some of the other concepts, right? We focus a lot on Main Street, but there's always been that concern. How does retail do solely on Main Street? I like that this has a pretty nice presence, plus it has that parking right in front of that kind of end cap space, which I do think could be a really good kind of hybrid, if you will, of a Main Street, but also Highway 12 space. So
I would just like to echo that, and that was going to be one of my questions, was the potential for City Hall. I mean, this is a downtown, and if we can continue to look at that option, I think it's a great way to go.
Mark, I like the mayor. I'm a very visual individual too, and I noticed in the packet we had elevations that represented the parking configurations, first floor parking examples, and you brought up a document or a picture here of an elevation of something that's either under construction or being constructed that showed the story elevation changes.
Yeah.
When do you suspect we would get something even preliminary that would have some type of elevation that would show architectural detail or materials or something along that line? I'm missing that component of it. I mean,
Yeah.
is that something that can be, I don't want to hold up the next step on that, but I mean, is there?
Yeah, I mean, you know, our initial take is give us elevations plus concept. That's our, you know, that's the visual that I think helps to have people understand it. The elevation takes time and resources, so and we've seen a bunch of them now. So I think that you know, between our conversations, between some of the imagery that they've shown that, and then that we've shown them based on the ones that have been previously done, I think we can get to elevations that everybody's comfortable with. I do think there's an intermediate step once they start design, that we would have more of a design workshop with planning council, maybe council EDA, to say, here's the architectural building side, the aesthetic side, which is somewhat different than the technical side of, you know, parking and engineering and grading and some of that, because it's a important statement. So
Maybe I can extend this to the applicants, the
Yeah.
developers. I mean, is the contrast in materials and the use of glass and stone and concrete and dissimilar materials, is that representative of your concept of what this would look like?
Excuse me a minute, Commissioner
Oh.
Fay. I'd like to invite you guys to the
Oh, I'm
podium.
sorry.
We're going to ask questions, so that way it's
Oh.
recorded and people can hear as well. And if you guys want to introduce yourselves too, that would be great.
Sure, my
Thanks for
name
being
is
here.
Fred Stelter, Stelter Enterprises.
And my name is Don Kraus at Buffalo Lake Partners.
So the question is kind of what could the building look like? And we really thought the Monticello site, we're very familiar with those people who are doing that. And in fact, we're involved with them on another project. And so we wanted to use that as an example and run that by Mark, and there was good feedback on that, because we thought, you know, the different elevation of the different pieces of it, broke it up, as well as the different uses of the stone and glass and stuff like that, gave a good visualization. It would be quite expensive to develop that, and so given everything, we wanted to make sure that there was receptiveness to what's going on here first, and then we can get into that. And I think Mark's suggestion of having an intermediate step, a workshop, so to speak, down the road once we know everything's a go. And what I'm hearing in terms of all the moving pieces of the infrastructure that goes along with Main Street and whatnot, I think there's going to have to be some nimbleness on both sides of this to you know, have make sure that things align and as we go here. So appreciate the opportunity. This would be a great project.
Thank you. Any other questions? I mean, I know we're not making any formal decisions, but anyone else while they're here at the podium? Okay. Thank you for being here. Any questions, thought, or feedback for Mark in this process and where we're at?
Yes, I'll just
Go ahead.
kind of weigh in, give some thoughts on this. I think did a great job of kind of listening to, what have I been on the EDA for coming up on 4 years now. This project predated me by about a decade, I think, and taking all of the conversations that we've had and what our thoughts for this site to be, I was ecstatic when I opened up this package. I think it really has kind of brought a lot of what we're looking for. I know that, right now it's kind of some challenging times in what development looks like, but, I think this is really bringing a fair deal to the city, to the developer, and is bringing about what we had as a vision, so.
Thank you for that feedback. Other feedback or thoughts for staff?
No, I'm,
Anything else you need from us tonight, Mark or Jacob?
No, I mean, if the EDA was comfortable, we can make a recommendation. It's not you don't formally approve, so you could recommend to the council. Ultimately, council gets to decide, but you could recommend to the council to further consider the preliminary or the purchase agreement. That would have to be something that comes before the council then and if there was any other information that you'd want with that. I mean, our goal would be to get to a point where we have a purchase agreement. We have the deal points in the purchase agreement. I don't know if you've read that. That's Scott's best way. I mean, they know, we know. It ties the land, but it really isn't binding. It doesn't say that we will do those things. It says that that's the basis for us trying to get to that next step. That's what we've been trying to get to. We want to have, the developer wants to have some, something to kind of base spending more money on. We want to have something that says we have a kind of deal terms worked out, and then gets us to advance to kind of next steps. And, those next steps, like I said, are going to be their market study, their financial kind of proof, trying to get to where they have that. Our next steps would be teeing up, not starting until I came back to you, but the phase 2. I'd really like them to kind of go through their first 6 to 8 weeks of their due diligence under the agreement to then get to the point where they say, yeah, we've done our next step and we think what we've told you works. Let's advance that. So.
Are you comfortable making that motion, Commissioner Warden, since you're not
Yeah.
on council? No pressure.
Yeah.
And if you're
So-
not.
Oh, absolutely.
But after what you said, I think it was a favor.
Yeah, I'd like to move, making recommendation to council to move forward with the current proposal that we have in front of us.
Okay. So there is a motion on the table by Commissioner Warden to bring forward the draft purchase agreement to the council. Looking for a second for that.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Francis. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, the motion carries 5-0. Thank you. Thank you for your continued work on this, and it's exciting.
See if we can get it to go here.
All right. So we're good? All right. Any other business to come before the EDA this evening? Hearing none, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Commissioner Fay,
I'll second.
second by Commissioner Burak. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. The meeting's adjourned at 7:44.